Good morning again, friends and family. Mark Johnson with David Johnson coming to you from Oklahoma City with number 5 in a video series of celebrating 70 years of ministry for the Reverend David L. Johnson. This segment today is entirely dedicated to Dad's round-the-world trip in 1966, the primary purpose of which was to spend 1 month in country in Vietnam, pretty much at the height of the Vietnam conflict. We're going to get Dad to talk a little bit about his motivation for the trip, why he went, what he felt that he accomplished, and how we've followed on with things that still resonate today through our culture. So, Dad, welcome.
Welcome.
And I remember this old family friend by the name of George Dewey. In fact, he lived here in Bethany, Oklahoma.
Yes.
At the time we moved back up here, he was still living, and we reconnected with him a little bit, but it was George that got you going on the idea of making the trip. Talk about that a little bit.
George Dewey was a worldwide reporter for the one of the news services, and covered all the wars and problems in the world. He went, and he came to Houston, and I met him because he had presentations in our church and got him in the schools, and he had a lot to say, and he realized that he was retiring and wanted me to go around the world with him to meet the people he had worked with, so that any time I wanted to go around the world, I would have friends.
But George never made that round-the-world trip, did he?
No, George didn't. We made all the plans. He wrote all the letters, got all of his friends ready to meet us at the airport. And 2 weeks before departure, he called me and said, you know, he says, my wife has been ill with cancer, and she's only given 2 weeks to live, and I can't go on the trip with you. You'll have to go by yourself.
I didn't recall that part of the story, that she was terminally ill.
Yeah.
I'd forgotten about that.
In fact, she did pass on while I was gone.
I see. And George's big question, and this makes sense for any journalist, I suppose, he was wanting to know, why is America involved? What are we doing over there? And so he, in asking the question, he was going to go himself, take you with him, but then as a result of his wife's illness, you wound up going on your own. You obtained press credentials, right?
Yes.
From which organization?
Well, the Market Street Sentinel was the local paper.
Sure.
And let's see, what did I get them from?
Gospel.
Gospel Publishing House.
Okay, so GPH, cool.
GPH, and several others gave me credentials.
Mm-hmm.
And since I had been doing writing anyway, they knew my ability.
That makes sense. That makes complete sense. And then you got connected with the military somehow?
Yes.
Can you tell us about that?
George Dewey helped to set that up.
Okay, so he knew people in Washington, knew people at the Pentagon or in the military.
Yes. And he made all the groundwork. We got all the introduction letters. In fact, in my book, I have copies of those letters to government officials who aren't even living today.
So folks, here's our merch pitch to you today. Here's Dad's book, Vietnam as I Saw It, which we're in the process of republishing. We're going to self-publish that, and that'll eventually be available for you to be able to pick up a copy of, or making a donation to Green Zone Housing. You'll see that on the webpage that we've set up for the celebration of 70 years. Okay, merch commercial over. So your purpose of going to Vietnam was to visit people from Channelview.
And work with the chaplains on the front line.
And I remember especially the young man across the street from us, Perry Hampton.
Yes, he
had
did.
been drafted and went to Vietnam. I think he was not there at the time you were there,
No.
but there were other men, there were no women in the military at the time, other men from Channelview who were there.
Yes,
you visited
yes.
them. You took some literature
Yes.
to distribute to troops. Talk about that.
Right. Well, several of the religious publishing companies sent me a ton of literature to pass out, because the chaplains were telling me, we got here so quick in the country, we don't have anything for them to read.
That's
So
very
I was
interesting.
taking in reading material.
So you brought that along with them. And along that line, the chaplains being deployed so quickly, maybe not having time to prepare. Talk about your work with the chaplains there in Vietnam.
It was tremendous. It was tremendous. I found out one thing: when you're in the war zone, they don't care what church you came from. The fact that you know God and have a call is the main thing. I worked with chaplains to this day I do not know what denomination they were, or I knew where they came from. And occasionally we contact each other because we got acquainted there.
Mm-hmm.
And this is all carried in my book. My book is nothing but reports I sent back to the paper.
That's terrific. That's terrific. I hope folks do take advantage of that when they can. You had an encounter with a now famous TV personality. Why don't you tell us about that?
Well, Dan Rather was he graduated from Bill Milby High School in Houston and worked for Channel 11 in Houston. And because I had brought guests in and worked with him on interviewing them, we knew each other. And then later, he joined CBS International, and this was his year to be assigned to the war zone. And so we were on several flights together, and of course knew each other from our actions in Houston. And he had the total crew that went with him was 16 people. He had several writers, 3 or 4 photographers, 2 or 3 bodyguards. And it was something. I'd run into him in different places.
So you talked about traveling with him. How did you travel from place to place when you were in country?
Aircraft. U.S. aircraft provided.
So the old Huey helicopters, the C-130s?
C-130s.
Yeah.
You'd have to share the C-130 with a tank. It would be in the same airplane you were, or a bus loaded with ammunition.
Mm-hmm.
And you had the seats around the edge. And sometimes it was a smaller plane, but that generally the C-130, you could fly a whole house in that thing.
And ground transportation at the time was generally by Jeep.
Yes.
This predates the Humvee era.
Yes.
And some of the Jeeps, I'm sure, were World War II vintage. They hauled them out of storage or something like that.
That's true. Yes, it was.
Whew, those things are old and hard. I remember having ridden in one one time. I remember you had a close call. There's a story that goes along with a close call. You were doing a routine thing, right? Just headed out to the bathroom, which the military calls a latrine, but tell us about this story.
And the Navy calls it a head.
Head, right?
Yeah. Well, it had been a long day coming from Saigon on a flight, and the chopper was to meet me. But they got involved in some firefight, and I sat under a tent like a revival tent for most of the day waiting on the chopper to come and take me cross country to Anke, where the 1st Cavalry was. The 1st Cavalry is Custer's old group, Custer's Last Stand, where the head of the horse on their shoulder. So I got there late in the day, and the chaplain I was going to see was out in the field. But his assistant, who'd only been there 2 weeks, he was there. And he was from Conroe, by the way. And they met me when I got into the 1st Cav camp. And it was late in the day. The sun was going down. I was tired as all get out. I didn't even have a cot. They didn't have time to get me a cot. The chaplain was out, so I slept in his cot. And woke up and needed to go to the restroom.
Okay.
Being very tired, I couldn't figure out where I was going, and then I remembered we had gone down the little hill to the latrine, which was connected to a shower, and we'd showered down there before. And as I stumbled through that, I heard a voice say, "Halt!" And I thought, well, somebody's in trouble. And I kept moving, and I heard the voice say, "Halt!" And at the same time, I heard a shell go into the chamber of a gun. And I said, that dude must be talking to me. So I stopped and turned, and he said, "What's the password?" And I said, "Sir, I don't know anything. I just got here, and I'm trying to get to that latrine down there." And he said, "Well, go on ahead." I stood there and couldn't remember why I was there. It scared me so bad.
Wow.
That I was that close to getting shot.
So
and then
folks,
I found out that the night before, the surveillance at the camp had been breached, and there was VC inside the camp and they were extra conscious of movements outside the tents. So
That makes sense.
Yes.
So, ladies and gentlemen, in the comfort of your own home, if you gotta go to the bathroom, just remember, know the password. If you do hear anybody say halt, make sure you pay attention to them. All right, that wraps up video number 5, the Vietnam years as I saw it. Thanks so much for keeping these videos alive for us by liking them, sharing them, watching them, and of course we look forward to seeing you guys in Houston down on June 17th. So long, and from Brother David we say,
keep stroking.